Hello and welcome to the Rogue Monkey podcast. My name is Kevin Pickard and welcome back for season 4. It's been exactly a year since our first episode, and what a journey it's been, as across 24 episodes we've reached almost 50 countries in 6 continents and close to 5,000 listeners. And over the next 2 months we're going to be bringing you 8 more exciting and insightful episodes. We're here to share stories of those that are thinking differently, challenging the status quo, and hopefully inspiring others to do the same. To keep up to date as our episodes go live, make sure you follow us on our social media pages. We're on Instagram, Facebook and Twitter. Just search for the Rogue Monkey podcast or head over to our website, theroguemonkey.org. So, on to season 4, and we're going to be speaking to a true trailblazer today, somebody who through their work has connected almost 750,000 people around the world. This episode features Sarah Richard, founder of the global community Girls That Scuba. Now, I'm not going to say any more than that, as I don't want to spoil what we've got in store for you today. So let's get into it and dive into episode 25 of the Rogue Monkey podcast. Connecting, supporting and inspiring. A conversation with Sarah Richard, founder of Girls That Scuba. Hi Sarah, how are we doing?
Hey, I'm good, thank you. It's actually not raining today in England, so I'm happy about that.
Yeah, it's a fantastic start to the day when the sun's beaming through, even if we are in a country where we can't do much at the moment. But I've given our listeners a little bit of an insight into your background, but very much headline information. So if you can just give us a little bit of an unpicking of your story so that our listeners can find out a bit more.
Yeah, I'll try and condense it, but then we can unpick it a little bit more later, I guess. So yeah, my name is Sarah Richard. I'm from the UK and I am a scuba diver, firstly. I used to be a swimmer, which is how you and I know each other. Now I would say I'm a scuba diver, and it's a huge passion of mine, so much so that I set up a scuba diving community for females called Girls That Scuba, and definitely get more into that later. But the reason I set that up is because, you know, there was a massive gap in the market, and it was predominantly a male sport, and there wasn't really enough like women kind of using their voices or platforms or anything to kind of promote women in diving. So I started up Girls That Scuba, you know, as a really small little Facebook group, and we're looking at like 4 years now, and it's now the world's largest scuba dive community. We have nearly 700,000 followers and members across the board, and yeah, it's grown hugely, and I would hope it has had quite a large effect on the gender inequality in scuba diving.
Brilliant. Well, we're going to come on to a lot of different parts of that journey there. Something I'm a little bit curious about, and we've not explored this even off air. Why diving? Like, go back to your childhood and all that sort of stuff. How did the diving route actually start?
Well, I think it definitely started with like being a swimmer and being brought up around the ocean. I was brought up near Hastings on the south coast, and you know, we would just see the ocean like when we walk into town or walk to school or something like that. So it was very much part of my life, and my parents always loved taking us to the beach. I was very confident in the water, and then when I started training and swimming, you know, I remember just like swimming just always made me feel like calm and relaxed. Even if it was hard, you know, it was still something that I really loved. And I think it was a natural progression from swimming in the swimming pool, swimming in the ocean, and then wanting to like know what was like more, what was under the ocean, what happened underneath it. And you know, it kind of progressed into this kind of like idea and fantasy of wondering, and then thinking, oh wait a second, like this is how I can know I can start scuba diving. I mean, I knew nothing about scuba diving, but you know, I was 19 and I gave it a go for the first time when I was on holiday, and I mean that day completely changed my life forever. I'm now 32 and I've been diving for 12 years and I've never stopped.
Okay. So, and obviously there's 2 aspects to discussion, obviously the gender aspect of what you do, and I'm curious again how that kind of was formed on your childhood and your early experiences, because you're surrounded by men in your younger years. You got two brothers, so was that an aspect to all of this, or how did that kind of factor into your journey?
Yeah, I think my like childhood of being brought up with, you know, two brothers, and unfortunately we lost our mum quite early as well, so it was just my brothers and my dad. And I think being brought up around men made me confident around them, which led to, you know, when I did discover this gender inequality in scuba diving, I kind of felt like, well, I can do something about it, because, you know, like I, as much as there's like a lot of bad things about gender inequality and about, you know, some of the things that have happened in scuba diving, you know, I knew a lot of good men, and I knew that actually if I could get the voice out there, that I would have like women on the same side as me, and I would also have men on the same side of me. So yeah, like it definitely stemmed from the confidence I had in the great men that I was brought up with, for sure.
So what made you decide, because for those of you who don't know, the south coast of England isn't particularly clear in terms of water. Every person I've taken to the coast has described it as a kind of brownie chocolate attempt at the sea. So what makes you step away from all of that? Because I know obviously, you know, both your siblings have travelled quite extensively. Was there a kind of a point to you where you actually went, I'm going to go abroad, I'm going to start having a look around and find perhaps some clearer water?
Yeah, I mean, actually, like, funnily enough, I'd never scuba dived in the UK up until this summer, and that was completely COVID related. So even when I started scuba diving, it was in tropical waters, and of course, I fell in love with that like crystal clear, like visibility, and you know, seeing the tropical fish and the mammals, you know, like that I knew that you couldn't see in the UK. So I kind of just always had in my head, maybe quite naively, that to scuba dive and to have these conditions, I would need to travel. And travel was obviously always a massive passion of me. It was like mine as well, and all my family. So travel and scuba diving comes hand in hand, really. Every time you travel, you go to a new country and you fall in love with this country, and then you think, well, actually, I've not even discovered this country until I've gone underwater. Well, that's how I feel. And then I would continue going to different countries, seeing different wildlife and different visibility. But I would say, from what you just said, like, I used to think that the UK is all like murky, cold water. It's definitely cold, and I think that nobody should ever tell you that UK water isn't cold, because that's a safety thing. UK water is cold. You do need to make sure that you've got a wetsuit on if you're going scuba diving, or even sometimes swimming. But there is some good visibility around. There is some amazing like marine life. You just have to kind of know where it is, and you can't just like walk in from the beach and, you know, on Brighton Pier or something and expect to see some amazing things. But UK diving is a lot better than most people think, and I only found that out 6 months ago.
I guess like I'd speak more from experiences with your brother actually on our various travels and surf trips, that actually certainly you head down West Country, and I did Scotland for the first time a few years ago, and when you see seals and dolphins and things like that in the UK, and you realise how clear the water is in certain places, it's magical what you can see under there. And there's an irony that somebody like yourself that was very early in the swimming world and got used to clear water, but actually found out that there's some amazingly scenic places in this country from not just diving, but actually just seeing the sea point of view. It's quite fascinating.
Yeah, I recommend everyone to go down to Cornwall and Devon.
So where did it all start once you went abroad? Because what was your first destination? What was the first stamp in the passport?
I guess it all started, up until this year, I've been traveling for about 10 years. And it started my first kind of trip away from home, really big trip, with South America. And I was on such a small budget, like literally £5 a day budget, but I was saved. Like, the reason I was on that budget is because I was saving my money to scuba dive in like Central America, in Belize, in Honduras and places like that, because places that I had heard were amazing. So for me, I always put scuba diving first. Like, I would rather eat just like some like ramen or some crackers and know that I could save that extra money for scuba diving, because it's just like, it kind of filled my whole soul was all about getting in the water. So it started there, and I managed to like travel, and I would like volunteer. I'd get like little bar jobs or something like that. Like, I didn't have a lot of money, but the money I did have would go into diving, and it would just progress my passion. And also it helped me realize really the insides of the industry, and like why there was really like hardly that many women around, especially into some of the countries that I was going to, which not a lot of women traveled solo at all, and not a lot of women were diving. But it really happened when I got my first professional job in scuba diving, which was in a country called Micronesia, which is like a very unknown country unless you're a scuba diver, because it's like the wreck capital of the world. There was like a war called Operation Hailstone, which was just after Pearl Harbor. And there was a lot of bombings, and there's a lot of wrecks. There's submarines, there's Betty bombers, planes, and it's all on the seabed of this particular place in Micronesia. And that's where I got my first professional job. And that's where everything started for Girls That Scuba. And that's where I realized that it was an absolute man's world. And not only was I, you know, a young 25-year-old woman just into her first professional job, I was like one of the first people in that area to actually work and not just do it as a passion. And it was the most sexist industry I'd ever kind of seen. It was horrible time. I had awful comments from guys, and it was there that I decided to give up scuba diving. And then it was there that I decided actually maybe not to give up, but to start Girls That Scuba.
So there's a couple of key turning points there. When you first experienced that, was there an element of not necessarily the gender split, but actually, I'm new into this, like almost a naivety, if you like, to actually, it was a lot darker than perhaps it might have seemed at the first point? Or once did it kind of snowball? Like, I just want to unpick some of those experiences where it really dawned on you that there's a lot more going on here than I'm comfortable with.
Yeah, definitely. It wasn't something, it's not like you're told, oh, scuba diving is a predominantly male dominated sport, because this is something that doesn't come up in everyday conversation. And actually, even when I was diving in some of the like more popular places where a lot of people would travel, there was like women, and you know, there was definitely places that you wouldn't have even known that it was kind of more male than female. And you know, so yeah, I definitely went into it naively, but I almost don't think it was naively as me. I think it was just that you have to kind of get into the depth of it and the thick of it to actually realize, because I still have people now it's a little bit different. We're talking like, you know, a few years later, but you know, people still say like, oh, like I had a boat full of girls, you know, in the Florida Keys this week, or in Gili Islands in Indonesia. And you know, and that's absolutely amazing, but that's because it's a very big scuba dive community, and you know, it's a very welcoming place, and a lot of people are going there. But when you go to these kind of places like Micronesia, where I mean, just like Micronesia is like it doesn't even really have like a government. It's just kind of like governed by their own people. And like the men on board the boat told me some horrific things if I went off of the boat. And you know, that's not so much to do with scuba diving, but when you're in a place like that remote and it is surrounded by men, and you hear the things, you think like, wow, I wonder if this is what the rest of the industry is like.
So was there any specific moments or comments, without getting too graphic, that actually kind of stuck with you as not necessarily a dagger, but actually they became like a fuel when this started building momentum maybe a few years later, that you look back and think, I'm changing that?
Yeah, definitely. I think I got a lot of comments about like being in a bikini, about like, oh, well, why don't you just wear your bikini on our dive and don't put your wetsuit on? And then I got like one of the comments that really sticks out was just that, oh, one of the guys that worked there, so effectively like my colleague, said to me like, you do realize you only got hired because of your boobs. And I was like, it's crazy, because like the job that I was doing as a dive master was like taking groups of people down to these like World War wrecks and going into like underwater massive bits of rust where you can easily get hurt, and you know, it's not the safest situation. Yet I'm told that, you know, it's only because I've got boobs that I'm even there. You know, stuff like that. I like always get the guys that comment on my weight and like comment on things I was eating, and just being like, are you sure you want to eat that? Like, you know, you're going to put on weight if you eat that, and then you're not going to look good, and you're not going to be like a sexy scuba diver anymore. And I was just kind of thinking like, since when does being a sexy scuba diver have anything to do with being a professional? You know, and I think I noticed a lot a lot there. Once it started, I noticed all of the sexist, like, sly comments that it was basically related to looks, you know, and how women are just there to look good.
How did you respond to that? Or were there any times that you can pick out? Maybe, I'm sure at the first time you either brushed it off or just taken back a little bit. But do you remember any points where you either bit back or called it out a little bit?
No, to be honest, because I think I was taken aback for sure. Like, brushed it off, like, just kind of like laughed and was like, oh, you know, just feeling awkward. And I don't think, you know, now the 32-year-old me likes to, you know, think, oh God, why don't you just say this and why don't you just say that? But the reality for a lot of women is, like, even if you're confident, like, I would say that I am confident, and I, you know, I have had really good experiences with men in my life, and I know how to talk to them, but I didn't know what to say and I didn't know what to do. And that was also a huge part of the problem that I saw. Is the problem one is that it's happening, but the problem two is how do you deal with it? And if you don't have anyone, like a support system or anyone to talk to about it, then is that just something that you accept, and then you just go on with life being like, okay, maybe it's because I have got boobs that the reason I got that job.
So at what point, because obviously there's some quite hard hitting stuff there, because, and you've already mentioned that you were pretty much ready to walk away from it. Was there a moment or a point or a support network or somebody that you actually thought, no, I'm not going to turn my back on this. I'm actually going to face it head on and actually try and make a difference and change it?
Yeah, I mean, from that experience, like, I managed, I quit that job, and I was like in the middle of nowhere, and I kind of was like, I need to get back to civilization or somewhere that's like busy and, like, you know, just to clear my head a bit. And I ended up going to Hong Kong, and Hong Kong is this amazing, crazy city full of entrepreneurs, full of, like, very, very inspiring people. And I got there and I was just like, do you know what? I'm going to put that chapter behind me, and I don't think I'm ever going to work in professional diving again. And I've never worked in professional diving again. So I kind of just said, that's it. And I kind of forgot about it. And then I started getting that itch to, like, want to scuba dive again, just as a passion. And, you know, being, like, you know, in a big city, like, wanting to head to the coast and do some diving. And I was like, oh, you know, I still feel a little bit bruised by those experiences. And then I was like, you know, I was in a very inspiring place in the city, and I thought, like, well, wait a second, like, if I'm just prepared to just, like, brush it off and then carry on diving as a hobby, like, that's such a bad thing to do. Like, I can't just brush it off. Like, if I want to continue as a hobby, then I need to actually, like, face this, like, head on, and actually reach out to other people and see if this is something they're experiencing, or if it is just me. And if it is just me, like, then maybe I should shut up and not do anything, because that's how you feel. So I actually started to look to see if there was any female scuba dive communities that I could join, and I could be like, hey girls, like, you know, have you ever had, like, some weird experiences with guys in scuba diving, and how do you feel? And I was so surprised that there was just nothing there. It was 2016, and, you know, for a lot of sports there was already, like, female communities, but diving just gets left behind. Like, as we were talking a little bit off air earlier, it's like, is diving a sport? Is it actually? Do people think it's a sport? Do they think it's a passion? Do they think it's a hobby? And so there was nothing. And I mean, other than it being an amazing voice, an amazing community, and a great idea to have a female network, that's the reason that it got as big as it got, because it was so needed and there was nothing there.
So was there kind of, obviously with everything that you mentioned at the start, how much it's grown, but was there kind of a tipping point where you felt, whoa, like it almost took you back a little bit of the traction it got, like, quite quickly?
Yeah, I mean, when the Me Too movement came out, that was huge, really, like, really, really huge for us, and for all sports, you know. And so I think at that time we must have had like 3,000 or 5,000 members in the Facebook group, and we actually asked members to, like, comment on any, like, sexual abuse they've had in scuba diving, like, specifically for scuba diving, and that we were going to adapt that to an article but make it all anonymous and just put it out as our name, as Girls That Scuba, and just, like, Girls That Scuba's, like, experiences, like, with sexual abuse and diving. And, like, we had hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of comments, and in that time, you know, there weren't massive amount of members, and it just, like, blew all of our minds. Like, everyone that like was working with Girls at Scuba on the moderating side, and all of the people, the members, we were all just like, oh my God, this is crazy. And if you think about it, it obviously makes sense, because to scuba dive, you have to be in swimwear and you have to be in tight lycra, you know, and tight neoprene. So they are like traditionally sexy things for women to be in. And yeah, it was crazy to read all of that. And yeah, I mean, I guess it really kind of powered the movement and really kind of got more people seeing it and more people joining.
That's fascinating, and I don't want to draw too many lineations because every sport has its own challenges. But when we interviewed Jennifer Say in the second season, maybe third season, and she talked about how when they first put the feelers out effectively for "Is it just me?" and the newsroom that actually put out the request for anyone to come forward said they got to something like 100 calls of sexual abuse in gymnasts before it was even remotely taken seriously, and they could not believe what they were hearing.
Wow.
And but it's fascinating that actually you basically just said exactly the same thing there, and I think it's obviously extremely powerful, but I'd imagine that's got to take quite a toll on you as a team of people to actually, I guess, almost a reality check of how bad it is. Because like you say, although you'd faced it and done something to move things forwards, hearing all of that for real from so many different people all around the world must have kind of really had I would imagine, quite a detrimental impact.
Yeah, and I would say it hasn't stopped since then. That was the movement that made it like more open for people to talk about it, but we still get reports, messages like on a weekly basis of things. And like, you know, we're talking about like, you know, not that there is a scale when it comes to anything like this, but something is like, maybe somebody is feeling like they're getting like, you know, text messages that are a bit inappropriate, to actually full on really, really serious things, which would be, you know, huge, absolutely huge. And the problem we have in scuba diving, and I don't know about any other sports, but we don't have a governing body for this kind of thing. And that is where like this #MeToo movement has been amazing, but there's still for us in diving, there still hasn't been too much progression, because there is no governing body. If you were to make a complaint about sexual abuse, there isn't anything. And you know, a lot of people have come to us and been like, you guys are the one that has to do this. You Girls at Scuba, you have to do this. And I would absolutely love to, but you haven't. That's so above my head. I mean, I have no idea how we would do that. We have nowhere near the kind of funds, the staff, you know, we've got the network, but you know, so that's something that we're working on. Just talking to people, it's just like a feeler, like how the hell can we actually not just keep talking about this, but actually stop this and actually have a way that it can be reported professionally and that there can be continuous help and support. I don't know if you know if any other sports that have these kind of things.
I can't think of a huge amount of sports that don't necessarily have governing bodies. I would imagine some of the more freestyle sports that have become more professionalized in recent years, for example, like surfing and skateboarding, that have now got obviously or inclusion in the Olympics and things like that, that tends to see a gear shift in the way that there's governance. But actually, if you look back to even the most organized sports, so we jump back to our example of gymnastics, their CEO, I believe it was, got told there's sexual abuse going on in their sport, and he picked up the phone to the parents and said, we'll deal with it. And then they put the phone down, and that was it. So even if you've got a governing body in place, having the right governing body in place and having it set up in a way that actually protects people, because ultimately governing bodies generally are set up to ensure governance and ensure that any funding streams and stuff like that make it to the right place. But wherever there is funding in anything in the world, there is always routes potentially for it to become corrupt. And it's a balancing act to tread. But I think we might have to pick that discussion up offline, because that's something I'd be very, very keen to explore.
Or if any of our listeners know anything about it, I mean, look, like, we're open to these conversations. This is the way it starts.
Yeah, and I think we've got a big enough network in the sports world that would happily engage in that discussion. So we will make sure when I send the show out that we include in the show notes all the contact information for you guys. I mean, let's move it forwards a little bit then, and actually, you know, from being in Hong Kong and sending out that first kind of that group message to where it is now, what are kind of some of the big things that have moved forwards and are much more positive than they were back in 2016?
loads of stuff. And I mean, like, going from that previous conversation, it is just such, that is such a small amount of diving. There's so many positive things. It's such a great industry to be in. That is just such a small part, and it's horrible that we have to concentrate on that, but that has to happen. There's so many things that have progressed, and it's crazy to see, because I think when you start anything like this, a community, it's such grassroots. You really start having no idea what's going to happen, and you really just think like, oh, I can have some new girlfriends to dive with. Like, that's literally what I thought. I never ever thought we would be, where we are now, and let alone actually seeing before my own eyes things progress. I mean, like, huge parts of diving is obviously the equipment, and going back only 4 years, like, you would still have to wear a men's wetsuit if you wanted a large, for instance. Like, wetsuits just come in, like, they do come in genders for sure, but a kind of like everyday unisex wetsuit, unisex is a man's wetsuit, and sometimes they'll put some pink on it, and like, yeah, some women like pink, some men like pink, some women like black, green, like pink is not necessarily a feminine color, it's just a color. But for manufacturers to be like, this is our women's wetsuit because it's got some pink down it, you're like, well, no, that's not it. But the great thing, because we have such a huge voice and such a huge platform, is that we can actually contact these brands and be like, hey, look, step up your game. And they're like, thank you, nobody else has actually ever told us this before. Like, maybe you get some complaints on Facebook comments and stuff, but nobody's actually approached us. Do you want to help us, like, develop a line, design a line? Like, what is it that women want? Like, what parts of the wetsuit need to be altered? And these conversations, I think that's like one of the biggest things. And the kind of the meetups that we have all over the world when we can travel, like, we have hundreds of girls come in to our, like, girls only events, and every single year it gets bigger and bigger, and we're seeing more and more and more women get into the sport, and it's incredible. It's only been 4 years. I just can't even fathom what it's going to be like in 20.
I want to read out something, because I was obviously doing a little bit of research before I started, and saw obviously kind of where it kicked off back in 2016. And just for an idea of scale for people out there, I'm going to list off just the list of things that I've found that Girls That Scuba are associated with. So you've got your standalone contact through the website: Girls That Freedive, Girls That Tech Dive, Girls That Scuba Together, Mums That Scuba, Girls That Scuba Book Club, Girls That Scuba Mind, Body and Soul, Girls That Scuba Buy and Sell, Female Dive Jobs, A Waste-Free World, Scuba Liverboards and Holidays, Girls That Scuba Store, and the discount membership cards. Now, that was a little bit of research for somebody that has absolutely no idea about the industry at all. But from getting from where it was 4 years ago to there, and having like 750,000 people around the world engage with your network, is absolutely incredible. What does that actually feel like now? Do you have moments where you look back and you pinch yourself and you think, how has this been 4 years? How has this been 3 years? Like, I mean, I watched an interview with you a little while ago from when it was 2 years, and the scale of it then was crazy. And do you kind of look back then and go, oh, we were just getting started?
No, I don't know. Like, it's so, everyone says that, like, oh my God, you must be pinching yourself. But I think I can't let the momentum, like, stop in my head to even, like, look back, because I'm just like, for me, there's just so much that I want to achieve with it, and there's so many places I want to take it, that I'm like, oh no, like, I don't want to look back. And it's definitely something I should. But I mean, I kind of look at life before Girls That Scuba and just think, like, I found, like, my meaning, and I found my purpose, and out of anything, that's the biggest thing. Like, it gives me every single day, like, something to work towards, and to change, and to actually make a change. But yeah, I mean, even when you say it, when you said it, and when other people say it, I think, oh wow, yeah, that's pretty impressive. But I don't necessarily, like, sit at home and be like, whoo, this is amazing.
Do you have an ambition with it all? Obviously, you've talked about loads of things, a global change in attitudes and those sorts of things. But from you personally, has there been a single thing that you hold on to say that, now that you've got, I guess, a grasp of where it could go, what would be the big ambition for you in the next maybe 5 to 10 years?
I wouldn't say that I have, like, one ambition, because I think it's, like, yeah, a global change, and like in the industry, and to bridge the gap. Like, I never want women to be, like, better than men, or men to be better than women. It's just, like, bridge that gap, and, like, in gender. But yeah, that's, like, of course, the, like, big mission. But, like, how do you ever, like, actually measure that? Like, it's hard. You can't be like, oh yeah, we've reached that. But there's just lots of little things. I mean, there's so many things that come into it. One thing, like I just put passionate and massively together. Massively passionate about is kind of finding more like niche groups within diving, within women. Like I'm like started a project before I actually moved to Jordan before lockdown to start a massive project that I wanted to start encouraging more Arabic women to start scuba diving, because there's certain pressures on Arabic women, sometimes not allowed to remove their hijab, not allowed to show their hair, sometimes not allowed to even travel or do any kind of sports or hobbies without a man. You know, there's a lot of limitations, not to everybody, but to some people. And you know, I moved over to the Middle East to start working within Jordan, Egypt, Saudi, Kuwait, places like that, where we could run these like women's only trips to give them like this, you know, to give them an opportunity and a passion within diving, that we could facilitate that and we could make sure it was a safe space. So for me, like those projects are the biggest thing, and it's hard at the moment because COVID is stopping us.
It is. I think, I mean, something, and I hadn't really actually planned on asking you this, but every time I speak to people who I've had a swimming background with, one of the things that sport in its widest sense very rarely sells is actually the impact and the changes it can have on your life, but also the impact it can have on others through you. And I think what you talked about today on our discussion is actually something where it stemmed from a love of sport and being brought up in a very loving and caring environment, and actually taking that moral background, if you like, very rounded background, and taking it to the rest of the world and saying there is a better way of doing this, you know, and going up against bad things. And actually that you can't measure that on a medals table or a participation rate when you're talking about funding and stuff like that, which we get hung up on in this country. Actually, the impact of what you're doing started perhaps a long time, or the roots of that a long time before you ever jumped in the sea, but it's gone on for a lot longer. So I just think that's really interesting.
Yeah, for sure.
The last thing I want to ask, if you look back, and I know you said obviously you let the momentum take you forwards and all those sorts of things, but if you look back to your first time you ever did it through to now, what's been your biggest takeaway? And let's dwell on something positive.
My biggest takeaway is that, like, as humans, we literally have no idea what lies on this planet, because until you explore underwater, you're like 70% of the planet is covered in water. If you don't go under, you're only seeing 30%. And for me, every time from that first time up until now for 12 years, the most incredible like interactions I've had with wildlife is like nothing else you could have on land. You literally cannot even explain what it feels like to look in a dolphin's eye, or to have a giant manta ray come above you. And these kind of interactions are like otherworldly, because you can't talk, you know, you can't take a picture for social media, you know, well, you can, but later. But like everything that happens when you're in the ocean is happening at a time. And I think my biggest takeaway is still the amazement that I have of the underwater world, and that it is never, ever, ever gone. It's only got better, and we need to save the oceans.
Well, we'll make sure we include all the links to all the various initiatives, because I've seen there's some really good ocean stuff that you guys are doing through your organisation. And I'm sure we'll get a lot of interaction on social media after this. But for now, thank you so much for your time. It's been fascinating to unpick a world that I've not known much about, but I feel a lot more enlightened.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Well, what a way to kick off 2021 and our fourth season of the podcast. Thank you again, Sarah, for sharing some time with us. And if you want to connect with both Sarah and Girls That Scuba, we've included all the links in the show notes. We're going to be exploring some of the themes from the discussion today in future episodes, including the gender inequality issues that permeate all aspects of society, taking up causes and creating communities of like-minded people, and we have a few guests lined up with whom we will explore their love of the sea. Make sure you share the show with your friends, let us know what you thought of today's episode on social media, and head over to the website theroguemonkey.org to find out more about up-and-coming shows. Next week, we're joined by another trailblazer and entrepreneur as we speak to the founder of The Wave and chairman of Surfing England, Mr. Nick Hounsfeld. Until then, have a great week, everyone, and thanks for joining us for the Rogue Monkey podcast.